I will do a welcome for everybody. I'm William Peters. I'm the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, and I'm one of the hosts for this event today. And I want to thank you all for joining us. To be really clear, just so you know you're in the right place, this is a webinar with Dr. Raymond Moody and myself, and it is entitled How the Shared Death Experience Changes Everything. And I'm going to be passing this on to Lisa Smart in a moment. But first, I want to just see if we can get Raymond to come on here. I see him here, but we're just working to get his video on.
Okay, it looks like it's, yeah, there he is.
There he is. Hey, welcome, Raymond. Good.
Hello, everybody. This is my wonderful son, Carter Moody, who is the person who actually does all the machine stuff for us.
Thank you, Carter.
Only mechanical.
So before we get started, first I want to say thank you for all of you who are joining us today. As we here on this platform, we can see the people coming in, really your names and where you're from. It's just beautiful to see people from all over the world joining us today. So thank you for taking time on your Saturday to join us. We're just touched by your interest and appreciate it. And I want to begin by taking a moment of silence to honor the people in Ukraine who are suffering atrocities that we can't even imagine. And so let's just, in your own way, however that is, whether it's through prayer or well-wishing, let's honor the people of Ukraine and all the people in Eastern Europe who are, suffering with the tragedy of what's happening there. So take some time, just go inside, however you do that best. Thank you. Thank you. With that, I am going to introduce our moderator, Lisa Smart, who together with Dr. Raymond Moody, they run the Life After Life website and platform, which is really a beautiful service to the world to curate stories and information about near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and other experiences that are meaningful around end of life. And so, Lisa, thank you for moderating. And I'm going to give you a little introduction, which I'm so happy to do. Lisa is the best-selling author of a book entitled Words at the Threshold. She's also the founder of the Final Words Project. And as I just mentioned, she and Raymond run this beautiful website called Life After Life. So, Lisa, take it away.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for How the Shared Death Experience Changes Everything. And as you'll find out today, those words are quite true. Very powerful work we're going to be talking about today. Of course, I am deeply honored to moderate this paradigm-shifting conversation with the two leading authorities in the investigation of shared death experiences. The first is my friend and colleague, Dr. Raymond Moody, as well as my mentor. Dr. Moody earned a PhD in philosophy from the University of Virginia and an MD from the Medical College of Georgia. He is a best-selling author of 13 books, selling over 20 million copies worldwide, including Life After Life, Glimpses of Eternity, God is Bigger Than the Bible, and Making Sense of Nonsense. Dr. Moody's work profoundly eliminates our understanding of death, dying, and grief, and offers compelling answers to the question, is there an afterlife? Dr. Moody continues to draw enormous public interest with his groundbreaking works on near-death and shared-death experiences, and more recently on the connection between language and consciousness. He has appeared on hundreds of podcasts and radio shows, Gaia Television, Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, as well as network television shows. and he has mentored dozens, if not hundreds of people, such as William Peters and myself over the years. William Peters is a practicing psychotherapist specializing in end-of-life experience and end of life, and the founder of the Shared Crossing Project, whose mission is to positively transform relationships to death and dying through education and raising awareness about extraordinary end-of-life experiences, shared crossings, and their healing benefits. As the director of the Shared Crossing Research Initiative, William and his team collect and study shared crossings. William is a global leader in shared death studies and end-of-life phenomena. He teaches methods to facilitate the shared death experiences and to assist experiencers in meaningfully integrating their experiences. William is a psychotherapist, as I mentioned, at the Family Therapy Institute in Santa Barbara, where he specializes in end-of-life counseling as a means towards psycho-spiritual evolution. He served as a hospice worker with Zen Hospice Project in San Francisco. His work is informed by his 2 NDEs and a variety of shared crossings. William's work has appeared in the American Journal of Hospice and Palliative Medicine and an Omega Journal of Death and Dying. William's book, entitled At Heaven's Door, What Shared Journeys to the Afterlife Teach About Dying Well and Living Better, is published by Simon & Schuster. So we have a very exciting hour in front of us, 2 of the leading authorities. And before we start, I wanted to just do a little bit of housekeeping. The first is that we have enabled the chat. I think many of you have already discovered that. You can just go down to the bottom of your screen. It's in the center. It's labeled chat. You just click on it. And also Shared Crossing administrator staff and Life After Life staff will be there to answer some of your questions about courses or blogs or anything that interests you. And also you'll have the great opportunity to interact with other people on this call today. Then if you look down on your screen to your right, you'll see Q&A. And there you just click on that, you enter any of your questions. We are a large group today, and we are going to do everything we can to get to everyone's questions. But I want to reassure you that we're also going to download all the questions when we're done, and any questions that we don't get to, we will answer in blogs, in webinars, and in future courses. So just know that your voice will be heard, but we're going to try to put the questions together so that everyone will be heard in the last 20 minutes of today's discussion. So let's begin, gentlemen. Let's start, Raymond, with how the near-death experience opened the door or paved the way for you to discern or discover the shared death experience.
Well, you know, when I went to medical school in 1972, I had already, was already kind of known for investigating this, and the faculty knew that student was coming in September who had this, who had studied these experiences. So anyway, one of the, my wonderful professors approached me with my first semester or first quarter there at the medical college and said, Dr. Moody, I've been wanting to talk with you because of some mentation she had. I just laughed because some mentation I had when I was resuscitating my mother. And so she basically told me about this experience and when she was resuscitating her mother, and as her mother was dying, she herself, the psychiatrist, she is a professor of psychiatry, drifted up and saw the scene from above and then saw her mother in spirit form there with her. That was the only one I knew when I wrote Life After Life, and I tried various ways of bringing that in, but I'll tell you the truth, the main reason I didn't talk about it was I couldn't figure out a way of saying this without identifying her. That was, and I also realized there's something kind of, you know, so it requires a different kinds of elucidation here anyway. And it's really interesting to me that even though near-death experiences created a kind of shock wave and a sensation all around the world instantly that shared death experiences have been studied for decades, but so far they haven't created that public sensation, which is nice for me because I've been able to think about this now for some decades without that atmosphere of sensationalism. And I think of both the similarities and the dissimilarities between these two things. One is the elements of near-death experiences are the same as elements of shared death experiences, with some exceptions. One being, of course, that a very common thing of shared death experience. Yes.
I'm going to just turn it over to William for a minute to have
Oh,
him answer
okay,
the
yeah.
question. And then we're going to get into the elements in a lot of depth later on.
Good.
So thank you. I'm so sorry to interrupt you.
Mhm.
Go ahead, William.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. It's wonderful to hear, Raymond, you talk about those early formative experiences in medical school. You've said that one before, and it just makes me think, what a pioneer you are and have been, and a gift to the field. So, and once again, here I am when addressing this question of how does the near-death experience pave the way for the shared death experience. I'm kind of the classic person here. I had my first near-death experience in 1979, and it was a high-speed skiing accident. It was a classic NDE, as we say, catapulted out of my body on impact, saw my life pass before me, sailed through a beautiful universe. Then I saw that luminous light, and I grew up Catholic. So I looked at that light and I said, that's God. And I said, God, I don't want to die, which is a very, as Raymond and I, from the research, most people who go into this state in the near-death experience, we don't typically want to come back. But for me, I had this sense that I wasn't done with this life. And I actually pled with that light, God, to say, let me come back. And so, here I am, I came back. I didn't think about that experience at all. Unfortunately, it was 1979. Raymond's book was out, but it wasn't in my culture. It wasn't, I just kind of grew up in a culture that wasn't, making space for these. So I would have one more near-death experience in an ICU where I just had a blood imbalance, idiopathic thrombocytopenia, and was floating above my body for a number of hours. And I was very clear at this point. I was close to death, but I was clear in that experience that I was not my body. And this was a key learning for me that, oh my gosh, whatever I identify as me, myself, and I is not me. It's not that physical body. So when I started hearing about these experiences as a social worker in the Tenderloin of San Francisco during what we now call the AIDS crisis, it was when HIV was spilling out of control, and a lot of gay men in particular were dying of this horrific disease. I was having clients come to me and say things like, I was at my partner's death, and at that moment I saw him travel up a cylinder of light, and he looked back at me and said, I love you. Thank you for caring for me. Well, as a social worker, a mental health professional, as Raymond knows, we weren't trained in this. So I didn't have any kind of support or lexicon to say this is this type of experience and it's healthy and normal. But because of my experiences, my near-death experiences, I was instantly receptive and curious and supportive. So for me, the near-death experiences, for me personally, paved the way for me as a clinician to be welcoming, accepting, and knowledgeable about the shared death experience. Later, I worked in hospice and would have many experiences personally and with others who would have these. And because of my near-death experiences, I knew they were normal.
Well, Raymond, the shared death experience of Dr. O'Driscoll and Jeff Olson that we're going to be seeing in a few minutes really had a profound effect on some of your ideas around the afterlife and of course, the near-death experience. Can you say a little bit about that as we continue our conversation here?
Well, yeah, this is, I think, a very important thing, and it kind of breaks down the standard framework for thinking about these things. And that even though the elements are common, There's a difference in that with shared death experiences, a lot of people report seeing the spirit or something of a dying person leave the body. That's something that obviously doesn't occur in the near-death experience situation. But there's a difference of perspective, I think, that too, that accounts maybe for why these haven't caught on yet. And one is that the story of the near-death experiences allows people a little distance, right? That's something that happens to someone else, so it's not as threatening. But when we start talking about shared death experiences, which are the same kind of phenomenon that occurs to bystanders who are not ill or injured, then people can more easily imagine maybe being in that situation. Whereas a near-death experience has an upbeat sense of relief with it. In a shared death experience, somebody dies. And most importantly to me, I think, because really what this is all about, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, is language, is that you got to think of the linguistic form. What people tell us with the near-death experience is a travel narrative, a very familiar form of discourse. We're all familiar with travel narratives. I got out of my body and went through a tunnel into a light and so on. Whereas the story with a shared death experience is a very unfamiliar kind of story. And this story is that something seems to open up, right? Like some other, maybe higher and more inclusive level of reality seems to intrude into this one. There's an opening at the scene of a death between here and elsewhere. And that obviates people are accustomed to this way of trying to think about near-death experiences in terms of the oxygen deprivation to the brain. You know, some say, oh, this is oxygen deprivation to the brain. Other people say, no, it's the afterlife. But with shared death experiences, it's the same phenomenon, but there's no question of a oxygen deprivation to the brain. So this is just too threatening for some people. I realize, some people want to hold on to that old way of thinking and debating. It's very threatening for a lot of people to come up with some new way of thinking about things. And that's what we've got to do if we want to incorporate this kind of experience.
Thank you. Yes. And William, I think I'd love to roll that clip on the two Jeffs, as we call them. Is there anything you want to add before we take a look at that? And then we can discuss more about the features that we all see in this clip and just share with people this extraordinary phenomenon.
I think it's a great idea, Lisa. Let's show that clip. And then just so you know, this will be Jeff Olson, who died in a car crash. Excuse me. He had a severe car crash and his wife and one of his children died. And then Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll was one of the attending physicians. So you'll hear their experience, which, just to cue this up, this was the experience, according, Raymond has said this so many times, that even after 3 or 4 decades of studying the near-death experience and shared-death experiences, he still wasn't convinced in the afterlife, but this was the experience that transformed him. So I'd love to hear Raymond talk about the pieces afterwards that were so meaningful to him. So thank you. Yes.
That's great. So Kelly Rose, or whoever is going to be queuing it up, let's get that video rolling. Thank you.
But my accident and my near-death experience, and the near-death experience was a result of a horrific automobile accident. It was a single car rollover. It was myself, my wife, and our 2 children were in the car. It was a horrific accident. Accident reports say the car probably rolled 7 or 8 times. And I blacked out for most of that, but when I came to, or when I was conscious of, wow, what happened when the car stopped, the first thing I heard was my oldest son, 7-year-old Spencer, crying hysterically in the back seat. And as a father, I thought, I've got to get to him. I have got to get to my son. And that's when I realized I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I could not tell. I was struggling to breathe. I was struggling to maintain consciousness. And there was incredible pain, but I had no idea of my injuries. I only knew that I wanted to get to my son, who was hysterical in the back seat. But then was the brutal reality that no one else was crying. And that's when I realized and knew that Tamara was gone, my wife, and that Griffin was gone, my son. And I say this, I really don't talk about, this is the darkest moment of my life. I mean, there I am literally panicked. I mean, grief-stricken with what's happened. And it felt like light came. It felt like light came to me and began to encircle me with this comforting light. And I was a little bit confused. I thought, wow, what's happening? And it began to feel as if I was rising above the scene of the accident, out of all that grief and that, I mean, it's the worst hell a man could be in. And yet there was this light, this comforting love, and it almost felt tangible. And I was a little confused, thinking, wow, what's going on here? Am I okay? Suddenly I could breathe. I didn't feel the physical pain. And as I began to come to terms that, wow, am I okay? I actually looked, and there in the light with me was my wife, Tamara. And she was okay. And she's glorious. She's beautiful. There's no head trauma. She's as beautiful and gorgeous as she's ever been. But she began to communicate with me, you can't come. You can't come. You've got to go back. Jeff, you've got to go back. And it was actually, there was emotion to it. She was crying. She was saying, you've got to go back. You've got to go back. And I learned a bit about choice. I mean, here I was looking at the woman I loved more than life. And yet I knew I had a little 7-year-old boy in the backseat of that car, hysterical. And I was in a position to make a very poignant choice. And I chose to come back. Now, in coming back, and this will set up what Dr. O'Driscoll has to share, it was not, I didn't have to even think about it. It was the intention. I'm going back, and I found myself wandering around a hospital. And I'm seeing the doctors and the patients and the nurses and the families of the patients. This is what I was experiencing. I was seeing every soul in this absolute love and magnificence with no judgment or comparison. Until I finally came up to a body or a man laying on the gurney that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was strange. And that's when I stepped forward to look and realized, oh my goodness, that's me. Or that's my body. This is me. I'm having this incredible connected experience, but there is my flesh. There's my skin suit that I was wearing, and I'm out of it. I am literally out of my body looking.
There was a nurse in our emergency department who I had come to know over the last several months or so, and I found out that she had very spiritual experiences. And in fact, she was the one that kind of coaxed me a few times to talk about my own experiences with her. And so we kind of knew this about each other. And I was just vitally going about my business elsewhere in the department when Jeff landed and was taken into the trauma room where the team was assembled to take care of him. And this nurse had been in the trauma room, and she'd had an experience already. And she came and got me and started tugging on my arm. She said, "You got to come to the trauma room." And I said, "Why? What's going on? I'm busy." She said, "No, you have to come. His wife's there." I said, "Whose wife?" And she said, "Come with me." And so she drugged me down to the trauma room. And I walked in, and Jeff was lying motionless on the table, surrounded by an army of providers who were providing his care. And above him, standing in the air, looking down, was Tamara, his wife, whom I'd never met, but who I instantly knew. In a way that Jeff just described knowing people, I knew her. She communicated this profound level of gratitude to myself, who I thought was doing nothing at the time. I later realized what she was expressing gratitude to me about was being aware of her presence and being aware that her husband was something more than just a mortal being. And I understood that he was going to live. She knew that, and I knew it with her. It wasn't some knowledge that's being forced upon me. Rather, it feels like it's floating in the air, in the ether, if you will, and for sensitive souls to just reach out and embrace it and take it in. That's the way knowledge comes spiritually for me. I had that experience in the trauma room, and I hasten to point out that one of the reasons I think I had this experience was because there were other doctors there taking care of Jeff, and I had absolutely no responsibility for his medical care. This nurse that drugged me into the trauma room, she came to me a month later in the ER and started tugging on my arm again. So she drugged me kicking and screaming to his hospital room a month later and kind of forced us to share our experiences, and that's what started our friendship.
Can you hear me okay now? Yeah, I beg your pardon. So I would love for both of you to comment about what we just saw. One of the things that struck me, of course, is one of the features of the shared death experience is kind of entering into another world, right? Seeing an apparition, and that is a common kind of occurrence or feature with SDEs. And I would love to hear about more features, and also Raymond, maybe a teeny bit more about how this particular experience really changed your thinking, because I've known you only a decade, and it's the course of our knowing each other that you said to me one day, I am now convinced, because for most of your career, you were a skeptic, you were scientifically trained and a skeptic, and it wasn't really until this occurrence, if I understand correctly, that you really were convinced. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that, and also from you, also, William. Yeah.
Yes, it may surprise people to hear that I am a skeptic. That is the reality, and something happened to the life partner. And let me explain. The folks who say, "Oh, I'm a skeptic about these near-death experiences," I think it's just the chemistry of the brain. Sadly, those people have no idea what they're talking about. And it shows they haven't studied philosophy a bit that they say things like that, because skepticism is an ancient method of philosophy that I was kind of born into. And what it means is that Pyrrho, the skeptic, was about maybe 20 or 30 years after the death of Aristotle, and who had codified logic. And Pyrrho understood logic very well, okay, which is a system for drawing conclusions, right, from premises. Okay, so Pyrrho understood that, but now he said, just a minute here, let's suppose we apply that system of logic, and we ask every question, and we really bear down. But in the end, and this is what skepticism means, folks, to refrain from drawing a conclusion. And they did it because they found, number one, if you practice it assiduously, it does an amazing thing to your mind. And secondly, if you think of it geometrically, and everybody is heading in this direction to get to the conclusion, but you're avoiding a conclusion, then you see things on the periphery that everybody else had missed because they're focused in this direction. So from that point of view, I can honestly, now was a professor of logic, remember, so there are real reasons for saying that in 2022, we can't yet draw a logical conclusion that there is life after death. Okay. A different question is my own personal conviction, and what I say with the Jeff Olson and Jeff O'Driscoll story, I give up. I mean, I just don't know what else to say. It's not that I've drawn a conclusion, it's that I'm in a box where I'm speechless. I mean, and I have so many other physician friends whose medical judgment I would trust. Jeff O'Driscoll, for example, I'm sure everybody saw in that clip, he is an excellent, wonderful physician. And I have a dozen other friends like that who have had remarkable near-death experiences or shared death experiences, and who unanimously tell me Yeah, this was not only real, but more real than this thing we are in now. And so I give up. I give up. Now, I will say too that for those of who are interested in a logical approach, that is available now too, because the primary logical problem with respect to the question of life after death that were stated very well by David Hume and the logical positivist philosophers like Ayer,
So
A.J.
Raymond,
Ayer,
I'm
are
gonna,
now
yeah.
gone. So if you want to, you can get beyond that.
Yes, and we will also be offering opportunities for people to learn more about the logic of the afterlife when we're offering some of our offerings around making sense of nonsense in the future. So thank you for that. William, I wanted to get back to the Olson thing in a little bit more detail and add to Raymond's comments about it's hard not to be convinced when you hear the stories from the shared death experience.
Yeah, I mean, I also think let's be really clear about what the shared death experience is actually, because I know some people may have questions like, is it just like a near-death experience? And I think to be really clear, what we're talking about here is, and this is why Jeff O'Driscoll's case is so perfect, it's a caregiver, loved one, or in the case of Jeff O'Driscoll, just a bystander. You know, he is not really a relative or a relationship with Jeff Olson or Tamara, his now deceased wife. So it is these people, caregiver, loved one, or bystander, that reports that somehow they either shared in the transition of the dying or had contact with someone who had just died and feel like they're experiencing the initial stages of the afterlife. So in this case, what we see, let's break this down. Jeff Olson is having a near-death experience with his now deceased wife, Tamara. At the same time, Jeff O'Driscoll is having a shared death experience with Tamara. Tamara has just died, you guys. This is the thing we need to get. He is tapped in to Tamara, but he's getting that connection through some, you know, I don't know how the words for it. It's so mysterious and beautiful that he's tapping into her presence right there. And he is sharing in Tamara's transition, and Tamara is giving him information about how to take care for her, husband, who could very easily die at any moment, but she is giving him information to how to care for him, which also in terms of the features of this experience that are so moving is that, and you didn't hear this when Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll was sharing this part of his story, but he does it in another part of this interview. And that is when he sees Tamara, he talks about the ceiling of the operating theater basically going away. And he's like, she's up there almost in heaven speaking down to him. And this is a primary feature of the shared death experience. Raymond called it the change in the geometry of the room. In our research, we call it the change in the time-space continuum. So, and also there's a notion of heavenly realms. So that's just a way of, talking a little bit about this experience. But I will say, along with Raymond, I was never really doubting of these experiences. But when I heard this one, I said, oh my gosh, if you really know and study this case, how else can you explain this? There has to be a continuation of consciousness beyond human death.
Right. I mean, I think the shared death experience sort of cracks the whole thing open because we really are looking at the spiritual dimensions of end of life. It's hard, you cannot say it's just the brain or, not enough oxygen and so forth. We're really entering this sphere of a more transcendental approach, a transpersonal approach to the end of life. And, I'm really excited, William, because you're going to be offering this course where you're going to be talking about the different features. And what I've learned for myself in the 10 years that I've been honored to be part of this field, the more that I have learned about the things that go on at end of life, to me, it's been through final words, the more that I've been able to enter into the experience with my loved one and also enter into these kinds of transcendental moments, right? So could you just tell us a little bit about the course, what you're offering? Because I truly feel that my work, and as I've learned about this material, has changed my approach to death and to life, truly. So tell us a little bit about what you're doing. And
Thanks. So really what Raymond and I are going to be doing here is offering the first course on the shared death experience, specifically in an online format. There has been no other course to date on this. And I'm just so grateful that Raymond is willing to join me in offering this. And what we're going to focus on is the kind of these 6 key elements of the shared death experience. And 2 you just saw in that beautiful clip that we just played with, as we call it, Jeff Olson, Jeff O'Driscoll. One of the pieces is that change in the geometry of the room where something happens where you feel like you're getting pulled into a different dimension. And while Jeff O'Driscoll didn't talk about that specifically, it's there. The other thing that we want to go into, one of the other elements, is seeing spirit beings. What Jeff O'Driscoll is seeing there in Tamra is a person who is no longer in the human realm. And the shared death experience has a variety of fascinating spirit beings that show up: spirit guides, angels, deceased loved ones, a welcoming party. All of this is a very unique and profound part of the shared death experience. We'll go into that. We'll also go into the out-of-body experiences and visionary realms. We'll go into seeing the spirit leave the body. You know, everyone's kind of asked, like, well, if the spirit leaves the body, can you ever see it? We now have video cases with shared death experiencers stating what they saw at the moment of death. They'll say, I saw a mist, a smoke, or a translucent something or other rising out of the crown and going to the top of the room, and then having a communication with us. Oh my gosh, it is spectacular. So there are other features as well that we're going to go into: life reviews that the experiencers say they share with the dying. Spectacular to be with your someone dying and then see their life reviewed to you and them, and learn so much about your departing loved one. So these are some of the features we're going to go to. And I'm so excited that we're going to be able to show videos as well from our research, the Share Crossing Research Initiative, so people can see and hear these stories from actual experiencers.
And one of the things that I love about the work that you are doing, William, is that you're a trained therapist, so that you offering kind of guided meditations and opportunities for people to really grok this material like I'm a kinesthetic person, I have to feel it, right? And so the material is very kinesthetic. You get experiences for people. So I also really respect and honor that. And of course, Raymond Moody brings 50 years. I mean, he is the person who blazed the trail for all of us. So it's I just think it's an incredible opportunity, and I'm really proud to be part of it. And we have about 1 more minute before we start the Q&A session. I really want to make sure that we give our audience plenty of time for the questions and answers. So please indulge me here for a moment as I share one thing about the SDE for me. Some of you may know that my mother has been dying this last year, and she's had a bit of a rebound, which kind of miraculously. But for me, learning this material, there was one point when she was close to the threshold where she started talking about my father being in the hallway. And, you know, I think about 10 years ago, before I started this research, I probably say something like, oh, it's probably the meds, you know, I mean, I may have discounted it. And now there is no discount. There's no question. Oh yeah, Mama, he is in the hallway, right? And we could have a conversation, and the kind of comfort I was able to give her through all the work and with the near-death experience and final words. So it just such a door opens, you know, as we get this material. So I just have to say that, because I'm so grateful for having been sort of mentored by both of you in many ways over the years. So, all right, we're at about 1:39. I want to give our audience plenty of time. So I'm going to start going through the Q&A, and we will do everything we can. We'll be, you know, if we don't get to everything, many of these questions will probably be answered in the course, in our blogs, and future webinars. So let's get rolling. This is from Lois. How do NDE vary among different cultures and belief experience? So, you know, what kind of variety do we see variation in near-death experiences across cultures and places? Maybe Raymond, do you want to take it? And just so you know, we only have 20 minutes to try to answer a lot of questions, so we'll keep them brief so that everyone can be heard. Go ahead, Raymond.
Well, That's a complex question. And there have been some anthropological writings about this. There's one of the study done of the Salto Indians in Canada, for example, in the 30s. But it's really, I mean, it's just the same. I remember one of the Indians in that case report from the 30s said that he saw an area of teepees of light, which is, I hear that all the time from people saying cities of light. So I think there are different cultural expressions, but I hear the same thing all over the world, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, this is a great question, Lisa, and as Raymond said so well, just kind of indicating that the cultures do make a difference in the interpretations and their experience of both NDEs and SDEs. And for those of you who want to go deeper in this, a scholar in the UK, Gregory Shushan, has done an amazing work interculturally on NDEs and SDEs, and we find that the cultures do indeed influence. So if there's a spirit being that shows up in an NDE or an SDE, it is going to be related to your tradition. So, it might be Jesus Christ here if you're a Christian in the Western world of Europe, the United States. But if you're in India, you might see, another deity from that tradition.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. So with the near-death experience, what brings people back? And of course, William, that would be also personally what brought you back. So maybe briefly you could say, what brings people back from the other side?
That's a great question. I mean, Raymond, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah. Do you want to
Well, I would just say most commonly it's that people say for themselves, they would rather have stayed, but they choose to come back. Most commonly because they have kids or from some other person who needs help back on Earth.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. How about you, William?
Well, I mean, I think what you hear in the NDE is people come up to the light or come to some point and either converse with deceased relatives typically, and they get told it's not your time. And that's kind of an amazing thing to hear. For me, in my experience, which I shared already, I went all the way to the light and no one was telling me it was my time or not my time. I was hell bent on it's not my time. I need to go back. But my experience was very rare. And so, in fact, I don't think I've heard too many other cases like mine. And one time I talked to Bruce Grayson about it, a scholar, and he just looked at me and said, "No, I don't hear that one very much." So anyway, and think about it. There are a lot of cases like, there's the orthopedic surgeon, I believe her name is Mary White, wrote the orthopedic surgeon who had the experience down in Chile where she almost drowned, and Mary Neal, excuse me. Thank you, Lisa. And she tells you she has a lovely family. I think she has 4 kids or so, and she's in that light and she doesn't want to return. And she'll say it quite frankly, but she has to go back. So just to cut some people some slack here, a lot of people who have love on this side, when you get over to the other side, it's different, and you may feel like, as much as I love these people, it's really great over here.
Yeah. Someone just asked a question that I thought was interesting about death anxiety. I think there are many people who have a lot of anxiety about death and dying. And she just asked for maybe a couple words from both of you about, how you might reassure her that maybe death is not as frightening as many of us think. Yeah. So Raymond, do you want to make a...
Well, I'd say that's a complex one because you have to ask people, first of all, what is it about death that you fear? Some people fear like it might be painful. Other people fear hell, right? Or many people just fear the unknown. And so you have to or separation from loved ones. That's the first thing, but it's a common thing to be anxious about death. And I think it's a lifelong quest, really. Plato said it was. He said, philosophy is a rehearsal for dying. And I think you have to think about these kinds of things all your life.
Yeah, thank you. How about you, William?
Yeah, so, as Raymond said so well, I mean, fear of death, anxiety about death is a very natural human phenomena. And so we need to have compassion for ourselves and others who get nervous and scared and upset and act out in strange ways around death. We see this a lot at the end of life, where someone is dying and it's pretty clear they're going to die, and yet the loved ones aren't ready for them to die, so they engage in a lot of behaviors that prolong their life that may not be in benefit to the dying in terms of their quality of life. If they're going to, it doesn't really make sense that we keep people here longer than they need to be. If they're going to die, then maybe the goal is to really deal with that anxiety and allow people to die in more natural ways. I will say this: both the shared death experience and near-death experience, the experiencers in research across the board strongly suggest that people's anxiety and fear of death diminishes greatly. I dare say alleviates in most cases almost completely. I am one of those people. You get near-death experiencers together and we'll all say, yeah, I'm not afraid of death. I'm really at peace with it. Part of the reason for that is, and particularly in the shared death experience, is that experiencers will say, and we have this in our research, they say that they know that their loved one is alive and well in a benevolent afterlife, and that they'll see them again, and that brings them great peace. And they understand that death is a natural part of life, and the human existence fits inside a larger context of existence. And so human birth and human death are natural. It's painful. You're always going to miss a loved one. But with these experiences, especially when you study them and get to know them, they will have that effect of loosening or softening your anxiety and fear around death.
Thank you. I volunteer in hospice. Is there anything I can do to help create a setting to make a shared death experience more likely?
Oh,
that's a great question.
I love that question. You want to go on that, Raymond?
Well, I have some thoughts about that, but I mean, what I would say is just, I don't know that there's any single general rule. What I've found in this is everybody's a little different. So I just sort of exercise my clinical judgment in those situations. I don't think there's to convey to people that you're willing to listen to them is the main thing.
It's interesting. This is a great question. I'm smiling about it because when I first met you, Raymond, in Omega Institute in 2009, you were talking about your upcoming book, Glimpses of Eternity, the first book written on the shared death experience. And I heard you talk, having had so many of these experiences and not having had a name for it, what I realized was not only do I know about the shared death experience, but I also felt I knew the means, the protocols, the methods to enable them. And that sounds like a bold statement. It was just dropped right into me. But there is a landscape here, and it's a spiritual landscape, but we can do a lot to help people to prepare for them. And there are three things I'll say briefly. First one you need to do is you need to realize that these experiences happen and they're normal. You have to learn about them. And our course will definitely help with that. The second piece is you need to address your psycho-emotional, spiritual, unfinished business in this lifetime. You have to prepare consciously for end of life. You have to be willing to say to your loved ones, thank you for sharing this life with me. I love you. And at some point, one of us is going to die, and get to a point of peace and acceptance around that. That's a tough one, but you can do it if you practice it. And the third piece is, and this is what we've been doing the Shared Crossing Project, is there are methods that you can learn where we teach people if someone is dying, how it is that the dying, as they're transitioning and leaving their body, how they can reach back to their loved ones and call them, draw them into the afterlife with them to let them know that they are, as we say, safe, well cared for, and happy. So yes, so this is the technology that the Shared Crossing Project is really focused on. So I so appreciate your question.
Great, thank you. This is from Peter. Is there any type of person or circumstance that is more likely to have an SDE? So Raymond, have you noticed that over your research over the years?
No, as I think I just, hundreds and hundreds of people and all kinds of different personalities. And no, I don't see any common features that distinguish those that do from those that don't. I think it's pretty much the same with near-death experiences as well. We just don't know why some do and some don't.
Great, thank you. How about you? Have you noticed anything in your more recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think Raymond I agree with Raymond, is like anybody can have these. We don't know why this experience happens. However, we have seen in our research that people that have mindfulness practices seem to be more likely to have them. And that's so interesting. So whether that's prayer or meditation or yoga, and my hypothesis about that is, I think they have the ability to stay present and concentrated when this field of the shared death experience opens up. There's an attunement that they may have that allows them to get drawn into this experience and not discount it. That being said, I want to lean more heavily into, we still don't know, and it's an equal opportunity experience.
Great. Beverly asks, do you need to be in physical proximity for a shared death experience? Does it include the transitioning of someone's soul? And does it appear that the spirit is saying goodbye to others while this happens? Raymond, what do you
I
think?
would say no.
Yeah.
You don't have to be physically present. One of the very common ones I hear is people say that they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning and they know that, whoever has died at that very moment, even all the way across the world. And I have a really good friend who's a student of mine for years, who is a hospice worker, who was telling me that her grandmother was in the hospital. So she was going in the car to visit her grandmother, but suddenly found her grandmother there with her in the car and saying goodbye. And I mean, that's just an example that comes to my mind because of the personal connection. But yeah, I just hear that sort of thing all the time.
Great. How about you, William?
Yeah, so, of the 250 plus cases that we have deeply analyzed, 2/3 of them, about 64%, happen remotely, not at bedside. So there's a data point right there for you. So yes, they happen at bedside and not at bedside, and that can be down the hall, that can be across town, or that can be on the other side of the world. But also the question from the person who asked the question asked about this saying goodbye. Well, yes, it seems like in particular with the remote SDEs, that the person dying makes an effort to literally say, thank you, I love you, goodbye. That seems to be the message. And that is just such a healing, message for the surviving loved one.
Sabine asks, can I learn to experience these expanded awarenesses more? What do you think, Raymond and William? Raymond.
I think you absolutely can. However, there's one thing I want to say at the very beginning, and that is this whole issue of life after death. Thinking about the afterlife puts people into a sort of mental state where I think sometimes it like becomes anything goes. This is what I would say. From long experience, I would say that absolutely it is possible to gain genuine rational comprehension of this biggest question of existence, life after death. And at the same time, that it won't come just from the narrative aspect that we all hear loving stories, I mean, I've heard thousands of these cases of near-death experiences and shared death experiences. Can't wait to hear the next one. And to tie that down, it is absolutely necessary to go through some conceptual parts too. But the good news is, yeah, you can absolutely prepare your mind in advance such that, for example, when subsequently you have a near-death experience, you will be able to come back and to articulate it to everybody in a whole new way. It's already happened at least once, to my knowledge, a distinguished scientist and artist who went through one of my training programs. So yeah, we can do it. And the trouble is, hold your horses. It's not just like hearing wonderful stories and like feeling nice feelings. You got to do some thinking with it, which is hopefully fun. But then once you go through that, you can absolutely talk about your near-death experience when you come back in a whole new way. It's already happened.
Thank you, Raymond. So William, do you want to add upon it?
Just this idea of is there ways that you can access these other states of consciousness? I mean, absolutely. I mean, these are practices. You can practice inclining your mind to these different states. And I will say, we will be doing some guided visualizations in this course specifically designed to attune your mind to these types of experiences. And there are other courses as well that focus on having out-of-body experiences and all sorts of transcendental experiences. So yes, the mind is very supple. In the material Western world that we live in, we don't do these practices as much as I think pre-modern cultures did. This is the way they entertained themselves and found meaning in pre-modern cultures, is they would practice these entering these different mind states.
So let's do about 4 more questions. We have 3 minutes. I think if we keep the answers brief, everyone can have a chance to get an answer. This is from another anonymous. I was at my sister's bedside at the time of her death, but didn't share anything with her. However, I was aware of our deceased mother's spiritual energy standing nearby. Is this common?
I know that happened to my sister. Yeah, she was absolutely. Yeah, it was when my dad was dying. That absolutely. My mom was dying. That absolutely happened to my sister. She felt the presence of my dad, who had died a year and a half before. Yeah. So I mean, and I've heard it from other people as well. Yes.
Thank you.
I want to piggyback on that, and I want to correct that question. That is a shared death experience, because she is actually sensing the presence of deceased loved ones. That is a spirit being who's come down. She doesn't see it, but it's a felt sense presence, and it's a family member. So that's part of the greeting party that we have identified that caregivers' loved ones often feel in the room. So yes, that is a shared death experience.
Great, thank you. Do you have any experience with SDE between people and their pets? What do you think, Raymond?
I do. One person. It's not something I should talk about, however, since this would be identifying to the particular person. But it was astonishing.
Yeah. So I will say, in our research, we have probably a half dozen to a dozen cases where with dogs are particularly seem to have really close relationships, and they can have those experiences, but also with horses. So we've had examples where this is out of our research, someone was away from their home and actually in the Caribbean, and they had a dream. It wasn't really a dream. It was more than a dream. It was, while they were sleeping, a vision of their horse coming to them, saying goodbye. And not only that, in this particular case, the other pets they'd had on their ranch were also there, the predeceased pets. So yes, do not think that our, four-legged friends or winged friends are not capable of having a shared death experience with us. When you have a good bond with them, there's no reason why.
Incredible.
Yeah.
We're going to do 2 more. We're at 2:00, but we're going to do 2 more of those. Right. And then, as we've mentioned a few times, many of these questions can be answered at Glimpses Beyond the Threshold, the course that's coming up in soon, right? So, all right, let's get this. This is from Stephen. Can 2 or more people in different physical locations have an SDE with the dying person simultaneously? Raymond.
I'm sure. I haven't heard of a particular one like that, but I'm sure, of the hundreds, there's got to be cases like that. Yeah. we're more than one person at different locations. Yeah.
Thank you. How about you, William?
Yeah, we have cases like that. Not a lot. I'll say a couple things here. Often we call these group shared death experiences, and they're mostly happen at bedside where there are, you know, 2 or more people, and they can have a shared SDE. Multiple people having a shared death experience. But what's curious is they may not have the same experience. Some will see light, some will sense deceased loved ones, some will have a share in the life review. They typically share in some common phenomena, but they also tend to see they have different experiences as well. And we also have some people that have that are remote that will also have that experience. So we have examples where someone's at bedside and then I'm thinking of one where someone's in Chicago, someone's in California, person's dying in California, 2 at the bedside here. And the one in Chicago says, oh my God, when Dad died, I felt, you know, our grandmother there was, and they said, oh my God, we felt her too. So yes, all of it's possible. That's what I want to say. We've seen so much. So don't feel like it fits squarely in with limitations. The mind and our spirits and our consciousness are vast.
Thank you. This is from Lori, and this is our last question for today. Are all transmissions from the other side beautiful? Do some who pass transmit other feelings? Raymond and then William.
Well, you know, I would have to think about this. I'm not sure, but let me just say that I've had lots of people with, numerically, not percentage-wise, over the years who had unpleasant experiences, but there's a lot more, it's just very variegated. There's not any sort of core where you can all sort of put them together. They're just scattered all over the place. And I mean, I that's my experience. Now there's the possibility, I suppose, that somebody who had a negative experience might be less likely to talk about it. But my impression is that it's rare.
Yeah, thank you. William.
Yeah, I would agree with Raymond on that. It's rare. In all the cases that we've received, very few have negative experiences. There are experiences that when they first have them, I'll give an example here. So imagine somebody dying. I'll just give the case. This is actually in my book, Sarah. And Sarah's wakes up in the early in the morning, and she is sweating and she's quite sick and she's nauseous and she's vomiting. And her family wants to take her to the hospital. And she goes, yes, let's go. They're getting ready to go to the hospital. She starts feeling better. So she pauses. Then she gets a call from her sister. And Sarah's sister says, I have very sad news for you. Your niece, her daughter has died suddenly with an accidental drug overdose. And so as Sarah recounts this, she realizes, and she actually is in the medical field, she goes, oh my God, I had the same symptoms that go with this type of drug overdose, vomiting, fevers, what have you. So we call these sympathetic shared death experiences, and they can be perceived as negative because they're painful. But if you work into them, you realize it's just a sign of the deep connection you're having with that person. They're maybe reaching out to you for help or what have you, or to say goodbye. So they're distressing for sure. But if you understand them as deep connection and empathy and sympathetic connection, I think that changes the view of it. And we realize once more how deeply connected we are across time and space in our soul and in our consciousness.
Beautiful. Thank you. So that wraps things up for us today. William, Raymond, do you want to say any, as the final words lady, I'm going to ask you for your final words today. So Raymond, do you have a few words you'd like to wrap up? And then
just thank you so much for everyone for tuning in today. I just really appreciate it. And this is just a fascinating subject for me. And I'm so interested that everybody tuned in. So hope that you will join us, for the continuation of this.
Thank you, Raymond. And what a joy it is to have you with us today. Thank you. And William.
Yeah, echoing Raymond, just thank you all for showing up. Such a large audience live right now. And I know others will listen later. So thank you all. And yeah, I mean, I just really, I think I want to say, I'm so excited to do this course with Raymond, and because the first time we're going to do it, and you know, Raymond is retired. He's doing this really out of the goodness of his heart because he doesn't need to do this anymore. He's had a successful career. So I'm going to say, you know, do it now when you want to do it with Raymond, because he may be just really relaxing there in Sarasota, Florida, if we don't pretty soon. So this is a unique opportunity. Hope to see you. And if not, thank you so much for tuning in. And Lisa, thank you for moderating.
Oh, thank
Thanks
you.
to everyone. Thank you so much, everybody.